Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that literally changes the game for environmental management systems. We're talking about the missing link in ISO 14001:2026. Specifically, we're going to unpack the absolutely crucial, inseparable connection between Clause 7.3, which covers awareness, and Clause 7.4, which dictates communication. For way too long, organizations have treated these as two totally separate checkboxes. But as we'll see today, treating them in isolation, well, that's just a recipe for operational failure.
So think about this for a second. Why do perfect procedures still fail? If you're an auditor, an environmental manager, or an operational leader, you probably know this frustration intimately. You walk into a facility and they've got flawless documentation. We're talking heavy binders, perfectly color-coded flowcharts, signed commitment statements from the CEO, the whole shebang. And yet, they still suffer from chemical spills and regulatory violations. How in the world does a perfect paper system break down so spectacularly out there on the factory floor?
All right, Section 1, the communication awareness gap. This is where we really see the battle of silos versus systems play out. The real answer to why those paper systems fail lies in a fundamental auditing mistake, and that's looking at environmental obligations in silos. We really have to draw a hard line between these two clauses to understand their distinct roles. Clause 7.3, awareness, requires personnel to truly comprehend the environmental implications of their work, while Clause 7.4, communication, is the structured process of transmitting that information. Basically, think of communication as the vehicle and awareness as the destination. You simply can't reach the destination if the vehicle is sitting in the driveway with a busted engine, right? We really need to completely shatter the illusion that training somehow magically equals awareness. The source material hits the nail on the head with this quote: "Awareness is not merely the presence of training records. Just because an employee signed an attendance sheet for a 1-hour induction does not mean they're actually aware. A signature is just a record of attendance. It's not proof of comprehension, and it absolutely isn't proof that they know how to handle a hazardous waste spill on a random Tuesday afternoon." And this builds right into the auditor's daily experience out there on the floor. There is a massive, real-world difference between required documentation, the paper, and retained evidence, which is the actual practice. The required documentation? That's just the intention. But the retained evidence, especially when we're talking about awareness, is the verifiable practice. If the paper policy says all staff will minimize hazardous waste, but an operator on the floor literally doesn't know which bin the solvent rags go into, well, the paper is meaningless. The practice has entirely failed.
Which brings us to Section 2, when weak communication fails. Let's look at what actually gets in the way here. There are several specific barriers to awareness that we really need to watch out for. First off, complex legal terminology. If your aspect registers are just stuffed with dense regulatory jargon, floor operators simply aren't going to understand them. Second, language differences and cultural diversity. Communicating in only one language to a multilingual workforce pretty much guarantees a lack of awareness. Third, a lack of feedback loops. If communication only flows top-down, employees can't ask questions or point out risks. And finally, passive one-way communication. Like pinning a policy to a dusty break room board and just hoping for the best.
Let's look at the real-world consequence of those barriers straight from a chemical processing plant scenario in our sources. So, this plant updated its hazardous storage requirements. And how did they communicate it? They just sent out an email. But the operational personnel on the floor didn't regularly check their email. The communication was completely passive. And the result? Unread emails, outdated storage practices, and a highly dangerous chemical spill. Passive communication literally directly caused an operational failure and environmental harm. That scenario right there, that is the textbook definition of passive awareness. It's when an employee recognizes a policy exists, like maybe they've seen that faded green poster on the wall, but they have absolutely no understanding of how it influences their daily operational procedures and risk control. When regulatory jargon isn't translated into practical role-specific instructions, passive awareness is honestly the best you can hope for. And when that happens, compliance is inevitably compromised. Okay, so how do we actually fix this? Let's jump into Section 3, Combined Lead Auditor Assessment, and see how modern assessment techniques can uncover these systemic flaws. Here is the golden rule of combined auditing. Awareness outcomes should reflect communication effectiveness. You literally cannot effectively evaluate an employee's awareness of environmental impacts without also examining the frequency, the method, and the clarity of the communication they received. If awareness is low, well, the communication process is broken. The two are intrinsically linked. So here's how that actually plays out in practice with the Auditor's Toolkit. Step 1. Plan integrated pathways. Please don't audit Clause 7.3 on Monday and 7.4 on Wednesday. You've got to audit them together. Step 2. Trace communication to outcomes. Follow a specific message all the way from the boardroom down to the factory floor. Step 3. Interview for comprehension. Actually, scratch that old habit of asking, "Did you attend training?" Instead ask, "Hey, what do you do if this specific chemical leaks?" And step 4, observe actual behavior, because at the end of the day, what people do is the ultimate proof of what they know.
And that naturally guides us into the final phase of the audit journey, tracing evidence and reporting. This is all about gathering the data, mapping the evidence, and writing up the findings in a way that genuinely helps the organization.
To trace this effectively, you have to map the specific communication channel directly to the verified awareness outcome. Let's say the channel is a morning toolbox talk. Well, the verified outcome is that employee standing right in front of you, clearly explaining the spill response. If the channel is a digital dashboard, the outcome is the manager actually tracking and adjusting energy targets in real time. If it's a contractor briefing, you should be able to observe that external team handling waste properly on site. You're basically linking the vehicles straight to the destination. But what happens when those elements just don't line up? You get a systemic nonconformance. And let's be clear, this isn't just a missing signature on some HR form. This is a massive, fundamental breakdown where communication processes entirely fail to translate environmental commitments into actual operational understanding across the organization. When clauses 7.3 and 7.4 fail together, the entire environmental management system loses its integrity because the policies are no longer driving the actual behavior. Ultimately, combined assessment identifies the actual root cause of awareness failures by examining communication process design right alongside leadership commitment. Integrated auditing is honestly the only way to ensure environmental responsibilities are understood, accepted, and put into practice. By looking at awareness and communication as one big, continuous loop, we stop treating the symptoms and start curing the disease. We finally empower the workforce to genuinely protect the environment. Which leaves us with one final, pretty important question. Are your policies just hanging on the wall, or are they actually in the work? Take a really hard look at your own communication channels and awareness outcomes. Don't settle for perfect binders if the reality on the floor is passive and disconnected. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into ISO 14001. Keep learning, keep asking the hard questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.